And the truth be told is that I'm not a die-hard hedgehog expert as such. I'm an ecologist by training, and I think one of my areas of expertise is looking at predator behavior, predator ecology over the years, and also developing tools to monitor wildlife, because, you know, species like tigers and hedgehogs have a lot of similarities in some regards, strangely enough. And one of them is that they are actually quite hard to see and find. Their very existence depends on you know, being hidden and out of the way, in a sense. So much of my career developed at ZSL over the last, I've been there for over 25 years now, on working on predators more generally. And interestingly, one of my first projects that I did at ZSL was looking at tigers in Sumatra, the Sumatran tigers in Indonesia. And I was amazed to be asked by the society to go and help establish a monitoring protocol for a tiger program that was just starting there. So how did I get to studying hedgehogs? Well, it was in the same sort of area of expertise that I do a lot of work with camera trapping, that I started working with Royal Parks. So I was invited to join the Royal Parks team in Regent's Park, which is right next to ZSL, so it was very convenient, to help with their their hedgehog, no tigers in Regent's Park, switch species, with their hedgehog monitoring program there. And I suggested to them that you know, we could do a lot of camera trapping work there, and that would be a great way to monitor the hedgehogs. And we actually had never actually caught a hedgehog on a camera trap. It was just guesswork on my part. And they seemed to think maybe they weren't a very good tool for monitoring hedgehogs, but actually they're brilliant. So we put out cameras that was in 2016, and that started the London HogWatch project. We're very excited this year. We launched our new logo, which we're very proud of. So why are we working on hedgehogs? Well, as you know, hedgehogs are in decline in the UK. And in the UK, they have been classified as vulnerable to extinction. So we've seen, as far as we can tell, something like a 46% decline over the last 13 years. And we think this is largely due to loss of habitat, destruction of habitat, and loss of the kind of conditions that make it viable for them to find food. And also sort of fragmentation, habitat fragmentation, big roads, road networks and things like that cause a real threat to hedgehog populations. Not only do it involve killing a lot of hedgehogs on the roadsides, but also disconnecting populations. And in that way, they are very much like tigers in conservation efforts. Tigers also suffer from isolation of populations across their range, and we're struggling with that with hedgehogs as well. Yeah, so I wanted to just give you a background on the project, and then we would give you some introductions to the Bushy Park survey itself. So what do we do at London HogWatch? Well, we use camera traps to provide information about hedgehog strongholds across Greater London, but also to help us understand the underlying distributions. And with this knowledge, we can better target sort of conservation efforts, local conservation efforts, and quite often we'll start with a local effort, and then hopefully we can try to start building up and get people talking to each other across London to improve their networks and improve their knowledge about these populations. So if I were to put it into 3 words, I would say we have detection, which is finding the populations firstly. Protection, once you've found a local population, get people involved, get them excited about the hedgehogs like you guys are getting, and then working with you to try to help conserve the populations. The most challenging is connecting these diverse populations. We're finding that we've got a lot of little small pockets of hedgehogs across London. And London is a big, bustling city with a lot of big roads and obstructions. And I think ultimately the biggest challenge is trying to connect populations across Greater London. But of course, if we can improve connectivity, improve green spaces, green corridors. It will not only be good for hedgehogs, but it will also be good for Londoners as well. So who are we? Well, as I mentioned, we are a small team, funded in part by the BHPS, the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, who've been funding us for the last 3-4 years now, and they've been a really important supporter of our work. But we also get grants from other groups like the Southern London Partnership in the Southwest. We've also had funding from the Rewild London project program, which is a Mayor of London Fund project. And that was for a project up in North London. And we've also been starting to work with industrial partners a bit to understand how hedgehogs might use sort of industrial land in areas like, so we've been working a little bit with Network Rail to see whether the rail lines provide corridors for hedgehogs to move along them. And we've had many partners like universities, volunteer groups, friends of groups like yourselves, and we work with local councils, and our work often feeds into their action plans. Right, so typically we do our surveys, as you guys know, between April and October. And we do systematic surveys, so I think many of you in the audience have done this with us, where we'll give you some points on a grid, large grid, and you have on your phone, you can find where the points are and put the cameras as close to that point as possible. And with these surveys, we can collect a tremendous number of images. And in the last, since the inception of the project now, we put out about 3,000 camera traps across Greater London, so quite a lot. And that probably was around something like 100 surveys over the last, 7 years or so. And we've been using, just this year, developing machine learning tools to help us process that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And again, this sort of information, up-to-date, relatively up-to-date information about the presence of hedgehogs is really vital for our conservation efforts. So, since its inception, now we've sort of done surveys in roughly about half of London boroughs, just under, I think. And we've worked in parks, and gardens, and allotments, private green spaces, and railway lines, and a range of different areas. And it's great tools. So camera traps are really good for hedgehogs, but we get a whole range of data from other species as well. And that is important in a number of ways. In some cases, the species themselves affect hedgehogs, but also, which gives us further insight about their status in the area. But it also tells us a lot about other species that are potentially important, urban mammals and birds. It can also tell us a little bit about how the parks are used, human footfall, the numbers of people going in front of the cameras, and then you can relate that roughly to the use of the other species in that area. And I'll tell you a little bit about this now. But so here are some photos of the species we see regularly. I guess you're not at all surprised that we get a lot of foxes, right? Foxes are by far the most common wild species I think we get. But we get badgers, we get muntjac, rabbits, and of course hedgehogs. We get a whole range of lovely bird species. Here's some photos. Particularly one of my favorite bird species here is that one in the bottom right corner, which was taken in a kind of inner city school playground, which was totally tarmacked. And we put a camera trap on a metal post in the middle of the playground, only working outside of the school hours. And we got this lovely jay, mom feeding a chick. And very excitingly, last year, we got the most extraordinary sighting of a pine marten in Kingston. And it's the first time this species has been seen, as far as we know, in the last century. So really exciting to see that. And it made it was quite well covered by the media. So we had an article in The Guardian, The New Scientist, so very exciting. Yeah, so since in last year, so that includes our Bushy Park survey, we put out 635 cameras, apparently. This is my team doing the counting. 30 surveys, roughly. If you imagine that every camera placement collects about something like between 3 and 20,000 photographs. That amounts to 3 million photographs. So I know you guys have been really impatient about seeing the results and everything, but when you start, we could end up with the Bushy Park survey alone was something like 1.3 million photos we got from that. I mean, just extraordinary. So I'll tell you in the next slide how we deal with that. But it's really quite an enormous effort to try to reduce that down to something that's accessible. We also did new surveys in Ealing and Merton, and we've had a total of, I think, something like 170 odd volunteers, 75 of whom let us use, put cameras in their back garden or in their allotment plots. So we've been trying to do a mixture of strategies, doing some private garden work and park work. So here's a breakdown of an example of the kind of numbers of photos that we get and how machine learning has helped us to sift through them. So in the side here, the pie chart, people are the most common species we get in the camera traps. And usually it's people's ankles and legs, fortunately, because the cameras are quite low to the ground, as some of you guys will remember. We also get a lot of blanks because vegetation warms up and the wind blows and it triggers the camera. The camera thinks that it's on. So if we've got now something called the Mega Detector, which is a Microsoft product, which can screen out and categorize all our photographs into crude categories. So it says these are all people, these are all blanks, and then it gives you a whole bunch which are the animals. And it doesn't know what the animals are, but it knows that they're not of those other two categories. And that's been really helpful because in this case, something like 80% of the photos are ones that we don't really want to use. We may want to count people crudely, just broadly to get a sense of footfall, but we don't need to see them. And this software is brilliant for that. And then the remaining 20% are more interesting. So you've got some dogs. You've got dogs with people, which get put with the people. And then you've got dogs without people. And then you've got foxes. And hedgehogs make up roughly sort of 0.1% of the photos that we collect. So 1 in 1,000 photographs. So we call this a bit like a needle in a haystack, right? Trying to find hedgehogs in it. It's a little bit easier than that because hedgehogs basically only come out at night. And you can kind of look at the dark images and then reduce the numbers a little bit that way. So we found a couple of sort of rules of thumb over the years with our work. One is that big roads hugely influence the distribution of hedgehogs. So here we have a great example of Hampstead Heath, where we found a good distribution of hedgehogs. So this is from the 2018 survey. The red spots are where the cameras where hedgehogs were active, but they're basically covering the whole park quite well. And then we have this place called Fitzroy Park area here, which is a very quiet neighborhood, where we could put cameras in people's gardens. We found hedgehogs. So there was a clear extension of the park hedgehog population to the east there. And then once we get to the Highgate West Hill, which is shown by that dashed line, it's quite a busy road. All the cameras to the east of there, we just didn't see any hedgehogs in the following year's survey. This is actually really nice habitat for hedgehogs, so it's a shame. And it might just be that because it's isolated and there's another big road on the other side, this good habitat you just find the hedgehogs are disappearing from those areas. They do occasionally see them there, but they normally don't get in. So this is something to consider. And it could be that we try to do traffic calming measures in certain key areas to try to link the population of these areas up, because it would tremendously improve the conditions for the hedgehogs in this area if they could have regular access to this site. So just to visualize the challenges of being a hedgehog in an urban environment, this is a view from the south of Hampstead Heath, so we moved from the east side to the southern side. This is Regent's Park, which has a small hedgehog population, which is famous for being the most central London breeding population in rural parks, in London. And they're still breeding here, but the population is very small and fragile indeed at the moment. This is Hampstead Heath, which I've already showed you is a very good stronghold for hedgehogs. There's about 1.5 mile distance between, as the crow flies roughly, between these two. And the hedgehog normally would be easily able to walk that distance in a night. And if you look at above, it doesn't look like it's actually quite green. There's a lot of, private gardens. But if you actually look at what the route looks like, okay, this is Hampstead Heath now. But there's a lot of big roads. There's a lot of bridges. There's a railway line. There's just so many things to traverse. It's going to be impossible for these guys to walk across this. Wherever you get abundant hedgehog population near a busy road, you get this, roadkills. This poor individual died on a zebra crossing at a 20-mile-an-hour zone in the peak of lockdown. So really, all things where it should have been as safe as possible to cross this road. Clearly, it wasn't safe enough. So it's a real shame. I think it's inevitable when you get a good, rich population next door. So I don't always see this as totally bad news, as long as you can minimize the loss of hedgehogs this way. I don't know. It's a tricky situation, but at least it shows there are hedgehogs in the area. The other thing we've shown in the southwest of London is that hedgehogs are affected by other species distributions. So this is the Barnes area and Roehampton here, and this is sort of sports grounds and stuff. This is Roehampton University. And we basically either saw hedgehogs designated by the red points, or red dots, or badgers designated by the yellow. And we didn't really see any overlap between the two species, so we never had to do an intermediate colour in this graph. And basically, hedgehogs are on one side, badgers on the other, and they've taken over basically these big public spaces. But it just shows you how important these smaller spaces in private gardens are. So these areas here, I suspect there's a nice little population all along this area. We just haven't done any surveys here. But I think there's a nice population to it. And this shows you the importance of this great deal we'll be talking about garden management and things. How important it is to improve gardens for hedgehogs, including creating garden hedgehog highways. My view is that you have to try to manage for coexistence of wild species wherever you are. And I certainly wouldn't be anti-badger in any sense. I think they do coexist in certain circumstances quite well. And in this instance, I think you could improve coexistence by having a stronger sort of hedgehog highway and garden maintenance schemes where the hedgehogs are. Right, so now to talk a little bit about Bushy Park. I know you're all keen. So we will distribute, I hope, a detailed report at some point, but we do have to let Royal Parks have a look at it first, and we have to write it up. But because there were so many photos in that, and we were very busy, we're always busy in the summer, autumn, with our additional surveys. We just haven't had time to do all this survey work, screening of the photographs. But here's the good news. We do have hedgehogs in Bushy Park, and we got lots of sightings. And here is actually a neat case of these photos, this sequence, just animals going in front of the camera, multiple photos taken for each time it crosses in front. The mega detector, which is our app that's a machine learning, has identified it as an animal and puts a bounding box around it. And we can use that to help study behavior, but also when the staff are looking through the photos to actually say, oh yeah, if it's in the distance, the mega detector can be quite good at spotting it. So it can help us to spot them. And so that's great. And so they're well distributed across the park, which is really important as well. So I think you've got a very decent population here, so that's great news. And when we get the report out, we can give you a bit more detail on that and maybe show you how it compares with some of the other sites that we've looked at over the years. Because I think as our knowledge builds up, we're beginning to be able to assess things a bit better as we learn more about hedgehogs in London. Of course, we get lots of foxes, as you guys could imagine. But foxes weren't the most abundant species in the park. You guys could probably guess what it was. The deer, my gosh, the deer. There's so many deer photos. And they greatly add to the workload of doing this work, because normally in places like Hampstead Heath, we don't have that many deer. I think there's only a couple of little, there's one corral of deer somewhere. And so at night, you know, hedgehogs are really quite easy to spot. But if you've got loads and loads of deer walking around at night, and rabbits, by the way, it's a lot more challenging. And of course, we can't get rid of these with a metal detector because they are legitimate animals, right? Great stuff, though. And rabbits, of course. Rabbits in the night, rabbits in the day, you know, just great. Actually, it was a really interesting park. We've got lots of lovely wildlife here. And badgers. So this is really interesting because we were seeing badgers and we were seeing hedgehogs at the same camera points. Some of them were the same camera points. And this is so we've only really only on one other occasion have we seen hedgehogs and badgers at the same point. So it's a good sign. It probably suggests that there's enough variety of habitat, maybe abundance of food for these species to coexist here. But I think more needs to be done to look at that, and I think that's really promising because we've not seen this before. We also get a great range of birds, and I'm really excited about these two owls, because we've got both the tawny owl on the left and a little owl on the right. And so it's just really nice to see those. But that's and we received quite a lot of owl photos in Bushy Park, so it's really lovely. Right, so that's my summary of the Bushy Park survey for now. And we were just going to talk a little bit briefly about about the management of private gardens. But I guess I would just say, you know, make it a bit messy, have long piles and try to avoid using pesticides. Do very much try to develop a hedgehog highway scheme in your neighborhood, because that just increases the amount of space these animals have to roam. And to link, you know, if you can link up your gardens for hedgehogs, you know, they can move a kilometre or two in a night. And each garden that's opened up provides more food and shelter and more opportunity to find mates. It's just great for them. So really important. These are our partners, just to sum up. And the partners over the years. These are our funders. Again, special thanks to British Hedgehog Preservation Society, who've been a long-term funder of ours. And our team. So this is Kate Scott-Cathy. Many of you will met her. These are some of the students and our interns here. These two guys here have been supporting our technical work a lot. And so that's the team. Thank you very much.